Welcome to the Water People podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by our co-host, Dave Rastovich. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. Today, we're in conversation with filmmaker Nathan Oldfield, whose creative offerings include 6 award-winning films, most recently The Heart and the Sea and The Church of the Open Sky, which earned the special honor for Most Heart at the Expedition Film Festival in Colorado. Nathan is also a poet and meditation teacher, and parallel to his creative life, has spent 25 years as a school teacher. We caught up with Nathan on a warm Aussie spring day, and you'll hear evidence of that in the droning of cicadas that join in the conversation. We hope you enjoy this meandering conversation with Nathan Oldfield as he stands on the precipice of beginning his latest film project. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the first and ongoing custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have lived, worked, and cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people who continue to practice the cultural, spiritual, and educational customs of their ancestors. We begin the podcast in the same place each time by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same.
I knew you were going to ask this. And I was thinking about it. Landscaping yesterday, playing in the garden, digging holes. I was re-listening to what Derek said about the gannet. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And this really subtle moment that could be invisible to a lot of people. And I feel like surfing gives you so many of those kinds of moments. You know, when you've been surfing for 40 years, you kind of have a library of them. I remember being about 16, surfing this little right-hand point slabby wave that I grew up on my own, right on dark, just before the stars came out and the moon rose, and it was full moon, buddy yellow. It hung over the headland and nearly kind of stuck to the land just before it kind of popped. It was almost like it made this sound. It was this kind of magical, mystical moment. And I never told anybody about it. I remember I used to have this curtain ring, like that you used to hang up curtains. And I used to have it on a little bit of leather around my neck. And I was taking photos at the time, but film was so expensive and I was only 16. I had my dad's old SLR or whatever, but I used to use this little curtain ring, like a little looking through a viewfinder. When special things, say like this moon, I caught it in my curtain ring, but I loved not telling people about it. Like the Duke said, you know, keep it in your heart. And another one a lot later, probably 10 years ago, surfing a little wave in a national park we got a hike in on my own, and a whale breached and an eagle was soaring. The waves were just amazing. And I used to do this thing where I love closing my eyes and seeing how long I can do it when I'm out the back. And it's quite scary, like, you know, when the waves are a little bit chunky and there could always be a freak set. And the sound, it's like this beautiful little rocky cove, and the hiss of, oxygen coming to the surface after a wave, and the sound of the raindrops from the offshore off the back of a wave, and seeing how much you can absorb. And they're just sort of 2 moments that I could think of. Like I feel like surfing for me is that's what it's actually all about, rather than how round your turn was or how deep your tube ride was. It's all these little moments of sunlight fluttering on a sandbank, and there's a little brim swims through a wave as you're duck diving, and I love to pay attention to that kind of stuff. And I just wanted to say all that because I loved Derek's answer. I feel like maybe that's my favourite, just to talk about a bird. And I feel like moments in life, the moment goes on forever. It's outside of time. It goes forwards and backwards into infinity, and the moment always lasts. Like Albie talks about, you know, the ride never ends. You're always surfing. And those moments, they stay with you. So I love those kind of little subtle moments, and that's what I loved about Derek's answer. Having said all that, I guess the first thing that always comes to mind when I hear the podcast and hear that question is, for me, it's losing my daughter, which is probably one of the reasons why I've been putting it off.
How did that experience, that unthinkable grief, loss, how did that change you?
I guess it goes without saying, it's really hard to articulate this sort of stuff. A traumatic event sort of means different things to you over time. At the beginning, it was just really sharp and ever-present and cruel and, just sharp, I guess, really piercing. And it sort of pierces every moment of your day and your years. And then over time, it gets a little softer. C.S. Lewis, when he lost his wife, he said, her absence is like the sky spread over everything. And that's what it's like now. It's not that. It's not the real the stab of like early grief. It's just it's a little softer. It's there, but it's somehow it's beautiful too. You two know the story, but for the benefit of the listeners, we lost our daughter. Her name's Willow, and she was stillborn, which means we weren't quite full term, but she passed away inside my wife's body, and we were able to deliver her naturally. And my wife, Lizzie, was 32 weeks pregnant. So Willow was small but completely whole and beautiful, just a little baby. And she had raven hair and olive skin, and my wife's Sri Lankan, and she really had that beautiful brown sugar colouring. She just wasn't alive. But the special thing was we got to deliver her naturally, like I was saying, and I got to actually do the delivery. And
that was a choice, wasn't it?
Yeah.
There was the decision to be made whether you would have time with Willow or not.
Yeah, the staff were really amazing. They even gave us the option to sedate Lizzie, to have a cesarean. In some ways, I guess that's kind of less traumatic than going through childbirth, because it was like any other kind of childbirth where there was an induction, but you have to bear down and do all the work. But we had a really great. Some of the midwives and the doctor encouraged us too that it can be healing and also for Lizzie's body to do it the natural way.
I just wanted to acknowledge the momentousness of that choice. Must have been you're choosing to experience what must be one of the most painful things you can endure as a parent, to see your lifeless child, to choose to be in that moment as a family together.
We kind of didn't agonize over it at all. We just wanted to, because we knew that we'd lost her. You just kind of want to save her every moment because you knew it wasn't going to be long. And she'd been growing inside Lizzie's body for so long, and we were so looking forward to having a part of our family, and then we're just like, it felt like the right way. We wanted to do it the right way for us. So it was really beautiful. And someone asked me if I had the choice to kind of for us to never fall pregnant in the first place with Willow and to lose her or to go through what we went through, the weird answer perhaps to that question would be I wouldn't have it any other way. She's still our baby girl.
Mm. I know from our conversations over the last couple of years since we had our conversation with Albie, and Albie shared the loss of a child, that was really impactful for you and for so many people to hear. And I feel, that this will be the same for a lot of people. And that's, an amazing life experience and life lesson and wisdom that you can share with people by going into it and stirring it up again. So thank you. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who would be listening who would feel thanks for you sharing as well. And I also wanted to acknowledge that you and Lizzie have this amazing ability to mark moments. And we just saw it when Lizzie had her birthday last week. And you, as always, shared an incredible speech, always so eloquent and beautiful. Your speeches, they're so looked forward to by all of us. And also Lizzie did too that night. And you were both really honouring and cherishing each other and marking the moment. And I feel like I was very fortunate at my 40th to have you do that for me. And so I understand being on the receiving end of that. It's really special. And I'm curious to know if you were always like that, or did the Willow experience bring a courage or something to you both to face that? Because I see that story as you really facing it and marking that moment and acknowledging that this is the brief time you'd have together. So you didn't agonise over it, as what your words was. You were just sharing. Were you like that before that? Has that been part of you always?
I guess there's kind of two parts to that question. Like, I'm not always brave. People might see it as brave, like deciding to go through a natural birth and really embrace that time that we got to have with her. It wasn't really brave. It was just that sort of parent heartbeat. You just want to be with your kids, So to answer one part of the question, no, I'm not generally brave. And the other part, I guess, is I've always sort of, we've spoken about this before, always had big feelings. And that was something that I've experienced kind of ever since I can remember, which can be not always easy to live with, having big feelings and sort of I can be often really inwardly focused. There's a beautiful quote, I think it's from the Upanishads, where the little space in the heart is as vast as the world universe, or something like that. And other people are really outwardly focused or relationally focused. I've always got a lot going on in the heart space. Did that kind of answer the question?
Yeah.
I'd like to rephrase the question a little bit.
Great.
Nath, for many of us, irreverence is a guiding force in our surfing lives. The escapism, being attracted to the countercultural. Maybe that was a little truer in the past than it is now. But it seems like reverence is the lens through which you portray wave riding, at least. Was reverence always part of your surfing experience, or has it unfurled for you? Was there a person or an experience that planted the seeds of the reverential as being tied to the wave riding experience?
No, it's just always been reverential. I just think it's such a metaphysical experience, riding waves, because your heart's in it, you know. It's all about feeling and an experience of the heart. For me, a surfing life, but I'm like that about other parts in life too. I guess that's just the way that I've been wired to see the. I feel like can see the holiness in things, and surfing is special in a kind of way, perhaps that other things might not be. Like an analogy I've used before is, if I'll go and have a hit of tennis, it'll be fun. Like, have a hit in a girl and someone goes, "How was tennis?" You go, "Yeah, it was really fun." And but my heart's never invested in it, Where surfing is, if you've had a good surf, it's transformative and revelatory. And
what does it mean to have your heart in it?
Well, it's kind of like we're all hearts wrapped up in flesh and bones and skin, but really we're all just hearts, And your feet might be in the wax, and there's a physicality to surfing, but really it's your heart. It is receiving the gifts of that. Sure, your body's getting the health benefits, but for me it's all about the heart, the joy, that kind of, you're just coming off the bottom and lifting. It's like your heart's getting lifted. When you come up to that high line or the turn or whatever it is, it's the magic. And my heart's in it 100%. I don't know what it's like for other people. I assume that I guess all we know is what we know and our way of seeing the world.
I keep pushing because I know that your experience of surfing is different than other people's experience of surfing. And the reason why your films and your photography and your writings touch people so deeply is because you remind us of the heart in surfing that so many of us forget. You bring the mystical to what can be mundane if we forget.
Oh, thank you. I guess I feel like saying with photos and films, I always feel like saying, it's actually not me. All I'm doing is like collecting light in my little light collecting contraption and just saying, look how beautiful it all is. Look how wonderful it is to be alive, And, Mary Oliver, she writes so beautifully about pay attention.
Mm-hmm. This is our endless proper work.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that quote in particular. My teenage years were filled with poetry, a work of writers like Khalil Gibran.
I stole Khalil Gibran, The Prophet, from my high school library. I still got it. But it was like 1991 and no one had borrowed it since 1982, and I thought it was like life-changing. I thought, I'm taking this thing.
So beautiful. Did it have the sketches in it? Was it that version?
Yeah.
For me, my experience of poetry and the poet is all about, seems to be about illuminating the ordinary, of paying attention, like Mary Oliver says. Is that the work that underlies your filmmaking, your capturing, your documentation of a life of wave riding? Is it about paying attention?
Yeah, for sure. And even beyond eliminating the ordinary, it's more that nothing is ordinary. I remember really early on, like speaking of poets like E. Cummings and William Carlos Williams, the sort of this objectivist movement came out of the States where it was all about seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary, like the divinity of ordinary things. That really had an impact on me. And then a little bit later, Keats Shelley, like the Romantic poets, they were sort of really acutely aware of the transience of things, that everything passes and that life's short. And I guess there's a tension there for them and for maybe lots of artists about somehow sort of being haunted by that transience. And that's sort of an experience I've had ever since I was a little kid, knowing that we're not here forever. And
do you remember a time of recognition? Was there a moment when you realized that as a kid?
Yeah, I've got a really early memory of playing in a sandpit. I would have been really little, like younger than Minnow, who's 5. Maybe I was 3 or 4, and these ants had captured this earthworm, and he was sort of wriggling, or she was wriggling around in like death throes, and it was covered by ants. And I was horrified, and I was like trying to save this worm, but it was sort of too far gone. And just having a sense of that life's not fair and it's short and it's precious, you know. And that sense sort of always stayed with me. And that real, I guess the beautiful thing about poetry is people are articulating sometimes what you weren't even aware that you were feeling. And, you know, say I discovered the Romantics like mid-teens. I remember, you know, the Ode to a Grecian Urn by Keats, like his poet's heartbeat was to kind of, speaking about the maker of this Grecian urn, but his heartbeat as a poet was to somehow capture this fleeting moment in time. It's like a pastoral scene on this Grecian urn, and that just resonated with me straight away. And for me, like I've been writing poems since I was a little kid, and it was that kind of idea of, and I wouldn't have even been able to articulate it at the time, but this idea of, like Mary Oliver saying, like, be astonished, but also how can I kind of memorialise this moment, and how can I somehow capture it? And I guess that kind of has sort of informed me as a filmmaker, and even making photographs, like trying to distill all these beautiful moments, like we were talking before about the gannets or the moon. Like, you can't capture them because they come and they go. They live in your heart and they live in space and outside of time.
The attempt to capture those moments is, I love how many layers are within those attempts, and then the experiences for a viewer or a reader when you come across those attempts. So say we come across a photo of yours paired with someone's writings, your own or one of the ones you revere, and it makes me think about koans, like Zen koans, and the purposeful nature of those, that they have a reverence. They're like a pause moment where you go, wow, how's the gratitude you feel right now for the ants on that worm or whatever it is. Though there is also the function of arresting the mind. And then you could say, especially in the Zen koan tradition, dissolving it, and then a true understanding filling your awareness. And you know, it doesn't reveal itself straight away in that tradition. But it makes me think about the usefulness of the poetic attempt. And I was just curious if that's ever in your mind when you're thinking about how you frame a film, or even just putting something on the internet through social media or making a print or whatever. Like, do you have that thought when you're doing those, or is it less of a process?
Like I was saying, there's always a tension. See, the thing with transience is, say, a sunset. The thing that makes it so beautiful isn't just the colours and the quality of the air, and it's the fact that it's passing. There's something wildly kind of fragile about that. And for me, my experience, because I'm kind of naturally a little bit melancholy, there's a heartache too. But at the same time, I'm trying to capture something that is beautiful because it isn't lasting, and then somehow I'm trying to make it last. And I'm not sure reconciled in my artist's head or heart, even why I do this. But it started when I was a little kid writing poems and messing around with my dad's old SLR. It's just this sort of natural evolution, and it almost happened without my choosing, like it happened to me. You know, I feel like, say, writing poems and songs, they happen to me. They reveal themselves to me. And films are like that. And a lot of times I don't even know why I do it. I remember being a grommet, like a frothy surf rat, and jogging past photographers, and you'd be putting your leg rope on, and you'd look back and you're just like, whoa, how can you do that? It's pumping. You know, you're missing out. And then all of a sudden I'm that guy. And sometimes it's really, I don't always love being that guy. I love being behind a camera and photographing or filming beautiful surfing. And sometimes it's hard. But it's just, it kind of, like the poems, it just happened to me, you know. So it hasn't always been conscious. And I feel like, you know, creativity or art, I find it really hard to talk about because it happens at that kind of unconscious heart space level. Yeah, it's hard to kind of wrap that up in language.
These are difficult spaces to articulate, but I love getting to try, and I love getting to hear you try.
Yeah.
You mentioned the idea of beautiful surfing, and this is another difficult topic to articulate, but do you have a sense for what connects your idea of beautiful surfing across different surfers?
Oh, yeah. I really love surfers who don't look like they're trying too hard. And I really love surfers who aren't self-conscious. You know, Rumi talks about, he wrote something like, I want to sing songs like birds sing, not worried about what people hear or what they think. And when you see surfers surfing like that, to me, that's really beautiful. I've always been drawn to understated surfing. I'm really happy to watch surfers not do a lot on a wave.
I feel like this is the coalescent point between poetry and surfing, and we see that come through your films and a lot of your detail shots of hands, of footwork, of water wrapping over a rail. Those, you know, you're making those ordinary moments extraordinary. You're noticing the mundane change of a finger, and you make it beautiful, and you help us see it as beautiful as well.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of a pendulum swing from surf media that I kind of grew up with, where it was very high performance based and high action, front lit, and kind of just about personalities like signature boards and signature board shorts and signature thongs and signature sunnies, celebrating all these kind of individuals. And then even the surf films, it's funny because I've talked to Taylor about this. Taylor Steele, I know he's a good friend of all of us, but I kind of, a little bit of the impetus when I first started 20 plus years ago, it was like, someone's got to make different films to these where it's just about like one, you know, lots of the edits are like one maneuver and focused on one person, and there wasn't any hands or feet or sunlight or and of course Taylor's, you know, he was a kid too when he was making those movies, and he's making incredible things now that I find very inspiring and has done for years. But, you know, and I get really drawn to Sonny Miller was really good at the things that other people weren't noticing so much or documenting so much, and Kidman. And I know lots of people would say, oh, he's too melancholy. I can't watch his movies. They're too melancholy. They're right up my alley. I don't mind melancholy. And then, you know, Jack, of course, was like slow-mo, 16 mil, gorgeous, always beautifully lit, wonderful material.
It's interesting because most of those pieces you would almost say align with the actual experience of going out and riding waves, because the actual riding the wave moment is, you know, 10, 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds if you're at one of the world's longest waves.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the time is duck diving under bubbles and effervescent water and looking at the clouds as you go under the turbulence and then popping up and there's a rainbow all around you and there's 1,000 prism dewdrops falling from the sky and fish and there's all those things. I know, like, for us, because we all really are shoulder to shoulder with this, like, that is the bulk of the experience. And it's really wonderful when you see others acknowledging and interpreting that through a lens or through writing or painting or music, whatever. But yeah, that's interesting to me.
Yeah, the actual stand-up bit of surfing is almost inconsequential compared to all, like, how much of our time is not actually standing up and riding waves.
And then I have to think about your kind of surfing, because Nath, you are probably the most proficient big glider board surfer I've seen, and you have the ability to swing around enormous surfboards in a way that makes them look like they're 6-foot 20s or something. You have such a skill with that kind of surfing, which we're not going to talk much about because we don't want everyone to paddle out on gliders next time you're out surfing. But what I see is that interpretation of all of what you're just saying through your surfing, where you're standing on a board that allows you to just stand on the board and feel all the other moments and watch the fish on the rays fly under your board, and you're not preoccupied with jumping up and down to generate speed or having to really pay attention to where you are on the wave, because at any moment you might lose your speed. You can stand there on the boards that you like to ride.
I call it breathing room. You notice everything. And you can only do so much on those kinds of boards, so hopefully you can kind of leave your ego on the beach. And then there's also kind of less performance pressure. Like, I grew up on little thrusters in the 80s and 90s
and you surf them well.
Oh, thanks. But it's so busy, you know. Even like you're on a little 20, you're on a wave, zap, 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 and you kind of kick out and you're not quite sure what happened. You couldn't even, you know, and there's something really beautiful about that. That's kind of almost like a sacred emptiness, especially if it's unrecorded. It's just this feeling of like, wow, I was going so fast and I'm not quite sure what happened, and that's beautiful. And I love that. And then I love that those kind of gentleman surfs on the big boards. And but for sure it's about that breathing room. I've
been thinking about this question a little bit lately. What is surfing? Like, what is it actually? If we break it down, you know, we think of it as someone going fast on a little board. Like, if we're thinking about the mainstream portrayal of what it is.
I remember reading Dane Kealoha wrote that, was in Surf Magazine when I was a grommet. His favourite moment in surfing was when his hands were on the rail. So he's stroking in, he's looking down the line, and he, you know, his hands on the rail, he's like arched his back, he's about to pop to his feet. And I remember going, oh yeah. But then you go, but what about tube riding, or what about the feeling of a good roundhouse or whatever? But 100% that feeling of just anticipation, joy, you know, when you're looking down the line and you're eyeballing the landscape of all that water bending, and that's surfing. For me, surfing is a feeling.
Can it be irrespective of what's happening around you, because it's about what's happening inside of you? Yeah,
for sure. You know when it's crowded and you're not getting many waves, and or you're just not on top of your game, and then you finally get that one, and for those moments everything else disappears.
I think the opposite is also true, that you can be sitting in a crowded lineup, and you're not getting any waves, and maybe you know this feeling, but the frustration starts to build, and the story starts to build in your mind. Maybe it's about cursing the people around you. Maybe it's, you know, frustration from having not paddled enough in recent memory, but those feelings become also the feeling of surfing on that particular day, and that's a choice. Whether to be in that story or to not be in that story.
Yeah, that's life. everything moves in seasons. And your surfing can go through, sometimes you can have 4 seasons in one day in one surf. Or other times you can go through a little kind of dark night of the soul in your surfing life, where weeks or months can go by and you lose the fizz, and you have those surfs where it's crowded and you don't get waves and come in full of self-loathing and all those kinds of things. But it's a season, and I always like to just tell myself that you got to go through the darkness to come out the other side. And like Jerry says, like, always paddle out. It's at those times when it becomes like a practice, like a yoga. You know, I meditate every day. Some days I'm kind of rubbing my hands together like, oh yeah, let's get this thing started. I can't wait. And then there's other days where I don't want to do it. It's sitting in that space and not ignoring the feelings, but just letting them be and going with it. And like I was saying before, it's not always easy having big feelings. My whole life I've kind of felt like I've had them. They can be quite up and down, and it's better than not having them. Like a bad surf's better than not having a surf. And like a frustrated meditation where you sit for 20 minutes, 30 minutes and you're kind of wriggling around and you're not quite kind of falling into that deep space that you want to be in. That's all part of the work. It's always there. That deep down source of joy is always there. We just don't always hear it. Like I meditate with a mantra and a lot of times I'll just sit. In meditation, we talk about introducing the mantra, get settled, do your breathing, let your breath go, gently introduce the mantra, and you try to stay with it. But a lot of times I don't have to introduce the mantra. It's just there. It's a vibration that's there all the time. And surfing, like this morning I was surfing and I was just knee paddling it after a big long lap and I actually heard the mantra just ticking away, because it's, it comes from the Vedic tradition, and it's this, it's, for example, like Om, it's a seed sound and it's a creation sound that's always existing in the universe, and it's always there. And it's like that with surfing. Your head might not be in the right place, but if you get your heart in the right place, even a difficult surf or an unflattering surf, there's something beautiful to access there. Which it's way easier to say than do. That's what it's like a practice.
Makes me think of that line, "A bad day's surfing is better than a good day's work," or something like that.
Apologies for interrupting the conversation, but we'd like to take a moment to recognize the generous folks who help make this podcast possible. Sunbutter Skincare is committed to protecting people and the planet. They make vegan, reef-safe SPF 50 sunscreen packaged in reusable and recyclable tins. They're also the world's first certified palm oil-free sunscreen brand. Check out sunbutter.com.au to learn more about their skin and ocean-friendly lines of sunscreen, surf zinc, and skincare. Thanks also to Gary McNeil Concepts, who make cosmic surfboards for cosmic people. Gaz's boards combine recycled and plant-based materials that are built to last without sacrificing performance. To learn more, head to GaryMcNeilConcepts.com. Speaking of work, I think a lot of people don't know that parallel to your beautiful work as a filmmaker, you've often worked as a full-time school teacher. What led you down What led you down that career path?
Definitely a few things. Like most surfers, a lot of us sort of plan our lives around what's going to keep us in the water, and I was really interested in the 12 weeks annual leave a year. And I was a little kid who grew, like we all grow up with all those school holidays. And then when I did a normal job, 4 weeks leave a year was really gnarly. So that was 100%, that was part of the decision. But also somehow I kind of feel like I'm a little bit of a natural teacher, especially with kids, not so much with adults, but I really love kids. I love being around kids. I feel really comfortable with kids. I remember being a little kid and, be an adult who'd be like, "How you going, little fella?" And they'd kind of rub your head or pat you like a dog. And I remember thinking, when I'm a grown-up, I'm never going to treat kids like that. Like, I want to treat them as little humans that they are. But I've been teaching for 25 years and maybe my time's in that kind of domain's coming to a close. Mm.
You recently, Nath, made a change out of that, and I remember just before this year, it seemed like there were lots of different things happening in your world. There was lots of work in your home space. There's 3 beautiful kids who are in the teenage years and early teenage years that you've grown with your beautiful Lizzie, and the strangeness of the last couple of years with COVID and looming illness and stuff. And I know you have a bit of a respiratory sort of vulnerability, and so that was particularly just like a sketchy time around then. And but it also coincided with you working really hard on your family home. And then the teaching and just a lot of stuff was going on. And then you made a couple changes in that world with teaching this year. And then you went down the coast and went surfing with Uncle Buddha, is what Minnow calls Albie. Uncle Buddha. You went with Albie and went surfing and just hung and seeked out an older mentor type character. And I know Albie is that for a lot of us. And we're really blessed and fortunate to be able to go spend water time with him. And when you did, some pretty big things happened, yes. That incident at the Point Break there with Albie and the other gentleman. And I don't know if you felt like sharing anything about that, but how that those sort of moments can happen in our lives, and surfing moments like that, and the timing and kind of that magic and, life and death and just significance can happen with this thing that we can just say, oh yeah, we're just going surfing. Yeah. Or, oh yeah, it's just a sport, and there's all these things. But I don't know if you wanted to share anything about that time, because from the outside, when you left here and went to go surfing down the coast, and everyone has a down the coast or an up the coast that they go to that's like their refuge, and you were going down the coast to be with Albie, and then when you came back, it was night and day. Do you remember that, La? You had so much sparkle in your eye and this electricity around you. I just felt like it would be interesting if you wanted to share anything about that.
Yeah, just so the listeners understand, like my dream job is to make surf films, but it's really hard to make a living from surf films. So I've got to make surf films and have a real job, and it's really tricky. And it's been trickier as the kids have got old. My kids have got older. It's also been harder as schools have kind of become, the teaching professions has become more and more demanding, so much more paperwork, and it's been crazy. On top of that, being a teacher through COVID and lockdowns and Zoom calls and, parents coming to your classroom in tears because their businesses are failing because of COVID and like all kinds of stuff. So there's been all that, and then I've also been doing a massive renovation on my house, and just feeling kind of sad because I'm not creating, and I really just like making things, and that kind of all came to a head this year, and my lovely wife was supportive enough to go, just let it go. We'll see what happens down the track, but just let it go. And so she's been really patient with me. I always joke with her, like, how many midlife crises are you allowed to have? Because I had another one this year. Oh, we've lost count. And definitely there was a big sort of crossroads for me a few months ago. And I let teaching go, and I do have a dream about making another film. And then I felt lots of, career angst and definitely creative angst. Like I don't have a lot of confidence as a filmmaker. I have imposter syndrome because it's all self-taught and I make it up on the fly, and I'm a bit of a one-man band. And I didn't know where all that was heading. So, I went and stayed with some dear friends, Dave and Rena, down the coast, and I was visiting Albie in the days. And I was able to just to pour my heart out to Albie, and he's a great listener. He just had some beautiful kind of wisdom around being an artist and making films. And I'd throw up every kind of excuse in the book that's been tormenting me for a few years, like, you can't make any money, Albie. And he was great. He was saying it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about the money. It doesn't even matter about the product. He said you're born to create things, and if you stifle that, you'll be unhappy. So he basically saw straight through me, because that's been the story of my life for like 3 years or more. He said, it doesn't matter if one person sees it, or if it makes $1 a film. It's almost like a self-betrayal to deny that part of you. Mm. If that's the way that you've been made, it's not self-betrayal for someone else. But for me, it feels like that. And even though I'm completely overwhelmed and don't know where to begin, I've just got to start taking steps forward towards that. Mm. As a teacher, I'm a primary school teacher, so I teach little kids sort of, age sort of 8 to 12. And you'd see a little guy, a little girl, and she'd be overwhelmed with, say, a writing task. And I always used to say, I do this little speech about mountain climbers, that if you're standing at the bottom of the mountain and looking up, it is daunting, and it's okay to be daunted. And you don't really climb mountains. You just take one step at a time, just one foot in front of the other. So I'm trying to practice what I preach. Yeah. I'll read you a beautiful quote. I have to read it because there's no way I could remember it. If you do not express your own original ideas, if you do not listen to your own being, you will have betrayed yourself. Rollo May. And he also said, what if imagination and art are not frosting at all, but the fountainhead of human experience? And going back to what you're saying about like the usefulness of art, it's something I kind of struggle with. And I know we've spoken about this before. You hang a painting on the wall, or a photograph, or you make a film or a song. It's not really useful. But you can't live without it. Mm. And I've got a pretty strong work ethic that I've kind of grown up with, inherited from my dad especially, and Mum. She's a hard worker. It's something I've kind of wrestled with, like, what's the point of making a film, perhaps? Say, what's the point of making a surf film? It's not financially viable. It absorbs a huge amount of space and time in your life. It's not useful. But I love that idea of art being not the frosting on the cake, but the reason, the meaning, the fountainhead of human experience. And when I read that, and these are the kinds of things that Albie was saying in different ways, and just the clarity that he has around these kinds of things, because he's been, a lifelong artist. he breathes it. And it's just so beautiful to have someone who's older than me. When I grow up, I just want to be like Albie. You know, people don't always have that in their life. Who do you want to be like? You know?
Your time together, it seems like it culminated in an experience you had in the water. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, so during the same week we were having these conversations. I was filming Albie on this beautiful day, a little Point Break, sunlit and sparkly and dolphins and real dreamy mid-north coast day. And a gentleman in his 70s sitting up having a chat to Albie and the local crew, and then he had a heart attack in the water, and it was really he didn't make it. Everyone got him to the beach, and I was ringing the ambulance, and it's a little country town. The ambulance is half away. Everyone's working on the guy on the beach. Every kind of emotion was happening. Some people will just come into their own in those sort of really tough moments, and we're doing, amazing work, CPR work, and it was traumatic that, his ribs broke and blood was coming out of his nose and mouth, and just kept working. It was a really long half an hour. Other people are in tears and hugging on the beach, and, there's onlookers keeping their distance, and it's a really powerful moment to just watch someone die. I hadn't seen a dead body since we lost Willow, and it was. I remember Albie saying, you 5 seconds before you're dead, you're alive. Just that real. We're talking about transience. That was the moment of someone passing over, and all of a sudden you're surfing, and then all of a sudden you're literally a carcass of meat on the beach, and someone's putting a sheet over you. Yeah, it was really strong, and it almost felt like God was just tapping me right in the centre of my sternum, saying, "See, life's short." And then at the same time, as kind of bloody and traumatic and violent, what the whole process was, there was something just really beautiful, because all of a sudden you are just a hunk of meat on the beach, because it's just your earth suit, and he wasn't there anymore, and his spirit had flown. It's this beautiful kind of moment of there's another world beyond this one. Had a real sense of that. And then Albie and I, and Robin and a couple of other crew, we were just sort of in awe of the sparkly water, and the dolphins were still there. And it was just a beautiful day to die. And how wonderful to go like that in the water, surrounded by friends at your local Point Break. It was really sacred. But for me personally, it was really powerful, because it was just that, like I said, it was that reminder that life's short, let's get a move on.
What will you do with that, with God's tapping on your sternum?
The tapping on the sternum was really about being encouraged to follow my heart. And for me specifically, that means making another film.
Nath, you're a master lensman. I had a few folks ask about technical aspects of your filmmaking, specifically, how do you keep water off your lens port? What's your technique?
There's hilarious. This part of the surfing world is very
philosophy.
Funny.
Every camera person has their own way, whether it's earwax. I think Jack McCoy said nose wax. Was it Jack?
Yeah.
Surf wax,
boiling water.
Rain-X, boiling water. There are many approaches. What is your approach to getting that crystal clear shot?
Please don't make it a disgusting one. Some of those are a bit funky.
I've tried everyone. I haven't tried the potato one. I reckon I've tried every other one that you mentioned. And it depends on your port. Flat port, dome port, but I mostly shoot flat ports. and it depends on your focal length. But every day 50 mil. I've kind of gone through a couple of journeys on this one. I tried the wax for a long time.
Surf wax.
Yeah. Specifically sex wax. And works for a while, and then it starts to soften, especially where we live.
Can you explain it? Because it doesn't make sense that you would just rub surf wax on the board.
So you do a couple of gentle little swipes, or you can even draw, say, a noughts and crosses grid on your port, and then you polish that with a T-shirt until it's disappeared, and water really beads off your lens when you jump in the water. But I've also found that it can fail kind of 30, 40 minutes into the surf. It actually does the opposite. Maybe the wax gets too warm and water starts to grab on it. So I haven't done that for a couple of years. I like to just have a clean port. So, yeah, it's good to wash it with hot soapy water before a surf, but then I lick it. I do the lick and spit method. And I heard a rumour that it works well after a soy cappuccino. And that, honestly, I don't know if it's just in my mind, but I agree. Maybe there's something to do with the soy. Wow. Yeah, because it depends, you wouldn't want to have a greasy meal and then lick your port. So there's a hot tip for you.
That's good. That makes that morning coffee all the more important.
That's right.
How do you fund your films?
Entirely self-funded. I fund them with my day job of being a teacher. And a real gift for us is, for a long time, I kind of did two jobs. I made films and worked as a full-time teacher, and meant my wife could stay at home as a mum. And that was really motivating for me, and it was wonderful for Lizzie and the kids. That was also back in the days of DVDs where you could sell a DVD. It's trickier now with the whole online thing and streaming, and people are used to watching things for free, and it's really sort of tricky terrain to navigate. And that's really played on my mind for years, and I'm still not sure how I'm going to fund this next one, but it's a cliche, but it's for the love, not for the money.
Money sure does help, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Before we first met, as we were first meeting, we were at a party, Shannon and Lisa's, our dear friend's wedding, and your wife, Eliza, came up to me as your wing woman, I guess. She said, "My husband is a filmmaker. He would really like to work with you." And I loved her then, and I love her now. And I just wanted to acknowledge the role that Eliza plays as the woman who stands next to you in life, in marriage, and also in these filmmaking projects. She is love in action. Eliza is.
Yeah.
We recently celebrated her 50th birthday, and as Dave was saying before, you gave a loving, beautiful speech, and in that you quoted Georgian writer Carson McCullers. She wrote, "The heart is a lonely hunter," and the quote that you read of hers was, "Falling in love is the easiest thing in the world. It's standing in love that matters." As someone who's stood in marriage for a couple of decades, what can you tell us of what it means to stand in love?
Wow, what a great question. First of all, I'd love to acknowledge Lizzie. I joke, I put her names in the credits of my films, like I've called her a cook before. Or I think the last one, she got producer and cook. And she's such a people person. I'm quite shy and a little introverted, and she's precisely the opposite. So she's really great at networking, and she's really been amazing kind of creative partner for over 20 years of making films. She's in lots of our lives. She's really the glue that sticks people together. And she's been really amazing for me, connecting me with people, keeping me connected to people, and kind of sometimes cracking the whip, like, you need to go to that event because you need to be seen and you've got to meet so-and-so and all those kinds of little things. But standing in love, easy to fall in love, but standing in love that counts. For the listener's benefit, I met Eliza when I was 10 years old, and we were boyfriend and girlfriend in high school. We had a break for a while, and then we started going out, and we were quite young when we got married. We didn't feel young at the time, but we were just kids. I was 23, she was 25, and we've been married for, I'm trying to do my maths, nearly 25 years. 25
she's
years.
50, so
yeah.
25.
25 years next year. And I think standing in love, that idea of standing is having your feet planted firmly, and steadfastness and commitment. And I come from a really rock solid family, like my mum and dad. They've been together since they were 17. They really showed me the way that that it's just solid. Nothing shakes your relationship. It's almost like it's not an option to explore otherwise. And that's how I've always just felt, like even though I was a little kid, 23, when I made that commitment, it's like I'm in. And the crazy thing is, I'm not the same person as when I was 23, and Lizzie's not the same person as when she was 25. We all go through so many different experiences and different seasons and different kinds of ways of evolving. We're always constantly changing, but the commitment and the loyalty, it's just always been there.
So you think it's a personality trait? Nature plus nurture?
Yeah, for sure, yeah. That makes it all sound like it's a lot of hard work, but actually I'm just in love. That's the truth. She's really easy to love.
She is.
She's got brown skin, dark hair, little cute ears. She's very smiley. I always think smiley women are really beautiful. And it's that opposites attract. She's so different to me and full of zest, and she's very compassionate. So it makes it easier when you just kind of still head over heels.
I wanted to ask you about this in particular, the standing in love, because we're at a point in our lives where many of our friends have been together for a decade or more. They have kids, many of them who are, needing them less, growing outside of the toddlerhood phase. And many of our friends are navigating transitions in their relationships and asking this question of, who are we now that our children don't need us as much as they did? Who are we now that we have been living in a house together, but not necessarily orbiting one another romantically or physically, or, maybe we feel a bit out of touch. So I just wanted to, ask your wisdom as someone who has stood through those phases 3 times or more, and ask about the standing as opposed to the falling.
Yeah.
Because standing can be exhausting.
Yeah.
Can be so many things.
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit like, that metaphor we were talking about before, surfing is practice, that there's a discipline, and in relationships there has to be that kind of mutual work. That it's definitely work. And we've had our rough patches and tough times, but at the end of the day, there's it's mutual. It's even. Yeah. And it's really difficult for for relationships where that effort and commitment and, you know, if people's heartbeats are different, it's really tricky. No matter how much one person's trying, it takes two people.
What I see, and you've been speaking to this in this conversation, is a willingness within your relationship to also let one another grow. For Lizy to say, I see you, Nathan, you're an artist. You've supported the family. You've done that for so many years, and now it's time. You need to go and you need to honor that part of yourself that needs to create. You know, she's stood up and been willing to allow you to grow in the ways that are true to who you are. And that's so inspiring as two people who are also in love and committed to being together and committed to allowing one another to grow into the fullest expression of ourselves, both together and as individuals. That's been so deeply inspiring for us too.
Really important to kind of set each other free to be ourselves as well. That, I think that's really key. Give each other freedom and not just allow, but to celebrate and to encourage and nurture your partner's passions and joys, and then to ride through the challenges with them instead of like, oh, that's just their thing, I'll let them deal with that. To walk with them in the hard parts of life as well. But I really don't feel like a relationship expert.
Well, I'm only asking you to speak to your relationship, not anyone else's.
I've only had 2 girlfriends in my life, and both of them were my mate's sisters, and one of them I married. And it was a long time ago.
I'm curious, Nath, how you retain, what is the precise process that you use to retain so many quotes and phrases, more than anyone I know? How do you do that so we can learn how to do that too? Because I feel like that is so helpful to guide us through moments like, you know, you want to be a good friend, and I'm saying you are a good friend. And I'm saying one of the reasons you're a good friend is because I feel like you just have such an incredible recollection for quotes from the mystics, from the masters, from the poets and the artists, that when you share one that comes to you in that moment where we might be sharing some anguish or something or a concern, you'll share one and it just hits the mark and hits the moment. So I want to say a big thank you for being like that, because it's really admirable and it's also really helpful. And I would love to be able to cultivate that ability in myself. And I'm sure everyone who knows you they know what I'm saying and would probably love to be able to do that too. How do you do it?
When I was in high school, it was actually my friend Adam who, you know, he had this thing called a think book. And he used to do a lot of drawing and painting and, you know, it's a bit of a scrapbook. And I thought, that's cool. I was about 15. And I'd already had books where I put my published poems and the ones that were worthy, my mum would type them out on a typewriter, and old school style, way before Word doc and stuff, and stick them in this book. But that was like my special poetry book. But I liked the idea of a think book being for drafts, quotes, photos that grabbed you, photos that you took, pressed flowers, a feather that you'd find on the beach. You just stick it in this book, and then I filled it up pretty quick. So then I just stapled another cover to cover, staple another exercise book to it. So I've got 2 think books that began in over 30 years ago, and they're kind of overflowing with quotes. And nowadays, I'm sorry to say this is way less romantic, quotes that grab me in a moment, I'll type them into my notes on my phone, and then I'll put them into one big Word doc that I can always access.
Great. So do you write them out? So you're actually typing them. So it's just like copying that.
Yeah.
And then that's a way to embed it.
Yeah, and I even did it, was it yesterday, the day before? I was like, oh, that's beautiful. I read something, was on a podcast, or thought, oh, that's beautiful. And I sort of let it wash over me. And then I nearly let it go. And I stop everything and I capture it. And also I think it's this beautiful way of, there's so much to learn from the masters and the mystics and the poets, people who've lived hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. And that what a privilege it is to be able to access those and to absorb their ideas and accumulated wisdom. None of us own wisdom, It's just a river. We sit by the river. And yeah, the beautiful thing is looking at all the quotes, we get to see so much more of the river now where in the age that we live in, because it's not lost. There's things that have been recorded.
Thanks for listening with us today. If you have a spare moment, please leave us a review or consider sharing an episode with a friend. Both help us to find the very best stories from our global community of water people. This episode was edited by Ben Alexander. The podcast soundtrack was composed by Shannon Sol Carroll, with additional tunes improvised by Dave and goofy-footed legends Neil Purchase Jr. and Christian Barker. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast.